Are we ready to get started?
We are. We're here.
Okay. Well, Shelly and I have some pretty good news today. We are now done with the legislative session, and so we are happy to report that a lot of money was included in the final budget for Orca recovery. And so we are excited to tell you a little bit more about what that will look like and how that will play out within the next year or so. So there were a few different things that happened in order for the bills that you guys supported to continue to work their way through the process and to become part of the budget negotiations. And I think one way to help you kind of see what that looks like here in Olympia is to show you the legislative webpage. And we can go ahead and walk you through what the budget bill looks like and show you where the funding is within the budget bill. Yeah. So give us just a second here. Can you see that now?
Can you see it?
Are you guys able to see the legislative webpage? Yeah? Okay.
They can see this.
Perfect. So what you do when you come to this page is you click bills.
That
works. And we're going to type in the budget bill. So as you guys know, we were tracking a few different bills for you all, and they ultimately did not keep moving through the process. But instead, the ideas that were within those bills were taken out and they were drafted or written into the big budget bill that passes every year. So that bill is 6032, so we'll type that in. And then we'll scroll down the page, and this is all of the information about this bill, and we'll keep scrolling down, keep going, and we will click on the bill, the actual bill itself. So if you scroll all the way down the page, then you can see on the left-hand side under available documents, you can see bill as passed legislature. So we'll open that up. And then we'll hit Control F, which helps us find something easy in the document. The bill is 449 pages. It's really, really long. So we will type in Orca. And you can see right here that it says that $76,000 for this year, and then $472,000 for next year are provided to help with enforcement of vessel traffic near orca whales. So when we were talking about your bill a couple weeks ago, one of the things that you guys said was really important to you was to make sure that people cannot come too close to the whales, because if they do that, then they can interfere or mess up the whale's ability to eat and to communicate underwater. So that funding is going to make sure that officers can enforce those rules that say you cannot come within a certain number of yards away from the orcas. There are two other sections of the budget that have to do with orca recovery. So we'll go back to the bill. And we'll hit next and see where the next orca shows up. So nothing, keep going. One more. Let's see. Yes. Okay, so here you can see that $837,000 is put towards hatchery production. So do you guys remember when we were talking about how there wasn't enough salmon in order to feed the orcas and that's why they were dying? So this funding is going to go to hatcheries, which are the buildings and infrastructure that helps the salmon spawn and grow, and then they get put back into the water so that they can feed the orcas. So there's money here so that we can do that as well. And then there's one other section on orcas in the bill. And it's $115,000. And what this funding will do is it'll let the governor work with the department or the Office of Financial Management, which is kind of like in charge of a lot of the money here at the legislature. And they will come up with a long-term plan to try and save the orca whales. So there are 3 different parts in the budget that have to do with orcas, which is really, really good. And I talked about specific funding for each of those 3 things. It totals $1.5 million, which if you guys remember, that's the same amount of money that you all wanted included in your first bill that we talked about. So that's really exciting. Shelly and I think that it's great that that funding was included in the final budget. Your bill sponsor, Senator Ranker, and Representative Blake from one of your initial bills were both really supportive of including this funding in the final budget, and worked pretty hard to make sure that those bills kept moving, and that when those bills died, that other people knew that they still cared about the issues so that it could be included in the final budget. Are there any questions?
Hagar, come on up.
So I just saw in the bill history that it made it to the governor's desk. Is it now a law that the boats can't get like too close to the orcas?
Great question. We'll actually go back to the webpage really quick and show you what that looks like. So we'll hit back. Just a second here. So we'll go back to Senate Bill 6032. And so yeah, you can see the chart that it's been, we'll scroll down a little bit more. So the bill has gone to the governor's desk, but do you see where there's not, the circle is not colored where it says governor acted?
Yeah.
That's because he hasn't taken action yet. So we'll scroll down the page a little bit for more information, and we'll go all the way to the bottom of what's been happening. And you can see that on March 9th, the bill was delivered to the governor. So the governor has, is it 20 days to figure out what he wants to do. And so he can either, he can take that action. But I think Shelly is going to explain a little bit to you about how that's going to play out.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question, because as you guys know, we have 3 branches of government. What are they? Does anyone know?
I think legislative, judicial, and executive.
Great,
Nice.
Good job. So the fact that the bills that were being considered and then the budget made its way all the way through the legislative branch is a really big deal. But in order for them to become law, they have to be signed by the governor, who is the head of the executive branch. So like Chelsea said, the governor has 20 days from the day that he receives the bill in order to decide whether he's going to sign it or not. There are a couple options for him about whether he, about if he wants to sign it. So he can decide, yes, this is a great budget, or this is a great bill, I'm going to sign it, and sign it. And then it becomes law based on the effective date in the bill. So some bills are effective immediately. The day that the governor signs them, it becomes law. Some bills are effective based on a specific date that are mentioned within the budget document. So that may be July 1st of 2018 is when this law becomes into effect. And some other bills don't have a specific date. And in general, if they don't have a specific date, they take place 90 days after being signed by the governor. So there's a couple different times when bills that have passed the legislature actually become law. So that's one option if the governor signs the bill right away. The other option is if he doesn't sign it. And if the governor does not sign the bill, does anyone know what happens?
It becomes veto.
Almost. So if the governor doesn't take any action on the bill, then it becomes law. within 20 days. So the only way for something to be vetoed is for the governor to actually veto it. So he has the option to sign it, he has the option to veto it, he has the option to do nothing, and he has the option to do what's called a partial veto. So he has 4 options. A partial veto is when there's a specific section in a bill and the governor likes all of the rest of the bill, but not that one section. He can say this one section is not signed, and he vetoes that section. It's called a partial veto. So there's 4 different options for the governor of how to address all of the bills that have been delivered to him by the legislature. And then depending on what he does with them, they come into effect at various times.
So if he partial vetoes one part of the bill, does the bill that turn into a law, or is it still just a bill because one part is just vetoed?
Good question. So the part that was not vetoed becomes a law, and the part that was vetoed is not. So for example, we're going to use an example a little bit later about proposing a law to make ice cream illegal. So if there is a bill that says ice cream is illegal, there may be several sections in the bill that says ice cream's illegal on Monday, ice cream's illegal on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So the governor may say, you know, I don't like this section that says ice cream is illegal on Friday. I'm going to ban that section, or I'm going to veto that section. And that would mean that ice cream is illegal on every day except Friday.
Okay.
That's terrible.
We don't like that idea, huh?
Did you say the broccoli is illegal? Do you want to come up?
Is that Rishi?
Kids, focus.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the legislative process, how a bill becomes a law. And now that the legislative session is over, the legislators that were here in Olympia are now back in district. Basically, they're back at their homes and they are doing their everyday jobs. Some of them are lawyers, some of them are teachers. So they're doing work that every normal day person would do. They're also considering whether or not they want to run for re-election. So does anyone know how many years a House of Representatives member is elected for?
2.
Good job, yeah. And how about a senator?
4.
Great, yes, you're correct. So that means every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives has to run for re-election. And that means the Senate, they're staggered. So half of the Senate every 2 years, and then the other half runs in the next 2 years. So a senator is in office for 4 years. So this year, the entire House of Representatives and half of the Senate is up for re-election. And so what that means for you all, or how you may be aware of that, is you may see some yard signs in people's yards or on the side of the road that say people's names on them. You may have people come by and knock on your door and say, hi, I'm so-and-so. This is why you should vote for me. So campaign season is a time for legislators and other people who would like to become legislators to get to know the constituents, which are the people living in their district, and to find out what is important to the people that live there so that they can properly represent them in Olympia. So that's a little bit about campaigns. We wanted to touch on that with you because election and election season, depending on who wins in November, will impact who comes back here to Olympia next January. There is a part of Washington's legislative process that involves the people more directly. So when a bill is introduced, you can weigh in on that concept in Olympia, but a bill can only be introduced by a legislator. How many of you know that a bill or a concept can be introduced by a person in Washington state? And if so, do you guys know what that's called?
amendment?
No, that's a good idea though. So in Washington, we have a process called the initiative process. And basically what that is, it's an opportunity for everyday people like you and me who are not elected to office to come up with an idea and present it for Washington state citizens to consider. So the initiative process starts by someone having an idea and thinking, that's a really great idea, I should make that into a law. And they go through the necessary paperwork with the Secretary of State's office in order to file an initiative. And once they file that initiative, they go around the state and they start collecting signatures from people that think that's also a good idea. So for example, you may file an initiative that says, I want to make ice cream illegal. And you go around and you collect signatures from people that think the same thing as you. Or you convince people that it would be a good idea. And in Washington, you have to collect roughly 260,000 signatures in order for that initiative to be validated. There are two different types of initiatives. There's an initiative to the people, which is an initiative that will go on the November ballot. So your parents may find a ballot in their mail this coming November, and that may have an initiative to the people where they decide whether or not ice cream should be illegal. The second initiative, I'll let Chelsea explain.
Great. So the other type of initiative that we can use to impact the laws that are made in Washington state is called an initiative to the legislature. And there were actually a couple of them that came to the legislature this year. So Shelly and I thought it would be good to explain that to you a little bit. So the example we want to use is what Shelly just mentioned, which is, let's say somebody wants to make a law that ice cream is illegal. And they want the legislature to have the chance to decide what they want to do, whether or not they want that to become a law or whether or not they want that to be answered by the people or their constituents. So there are a few things that could happen. So first, the legislature can take the initiative that's before them and they can pass it. They can say, we as an elected body think that ice cream should be illegal. And if that happens, then that's it. Ice cream is illegal and that's it. Or the legislature can say, well, we kind of like ice cream on Fridays. So ice cream is going to be illegal every other day of the week except Friday. And if they do that and they pass the bill and it's amended to reflect that change that they had, then what happens is that the people on their ballot get to make a decision about whether or not they liked the initiative when it was first introduced or what they like if they like the amendment as the legislature changed it. So that would mean that your parents or your older siblings, people that are registered voters, get to decide if they would like to have ice cream, if they would never like to have ice cream, or if they would like to have it just on Fridays. And then the third option is that the legislature can decide that they are not going to take action on the bill, on the initiative at all. So it can be introduced here just like a bill would in Olympia, and then the legislature is not going to give it a hearing, or perhaps they give it a hearing and they pass it out of their first committee, but they don't pass it out of the second one, and then it doesn't pass off the floor, and it doesn't move through the process the same way a bill would. And so if that doesn't happen, then the initiative is not passed into law. And when that happens, then that idea or that initiative in turn goes straight back to the ballot, and then the people get to decide whether or not they want ice cream to be illegal. So there are a few different options, and I think the goal here is that initiatives allow people who have an idea to bring that forward, and it's a really important part of our process where we believe that the people in our country and in our state should have the opportunity to change laws. And Shelly mentioned the number of signatures that you have to collect. You have to find a lot of people that agree with you in order to get that initiative brought to the legislature. But once you do that, then there's a bit of a recognition that it's an important idea and it's something we should be considering. So the legislature can have the opportunity to weigh in Or they could say at the end of the day, you know, this is a really important question and we don't want to answer it. We want you, the people, to answer it. And that's when you see it on your ballot. So those are a couple things that you will be seeing in the next couple of months. You'll see yard signs because there are currently campaigns that are going to start kicking off. And then you're going to see ballots that come into your parents' mailboxes that ask them to weigh in on who they want to be in office next year in Olympia and whether or not they want certain measures like initiatives to pass into law. Are there any questions about that process? Are there any questions at all about your bill and what's happened this year and where we go from there?
Yeah.
So we're gonna still look at the new bill that you just showed us just now. Like if you want to look at it up at home.
Yeah, you can. So you go back to that main legislative webpage. Yeah, I'll show you one more time what you can do. Give us just a second here. So we'll actually start at the beginning, and what you will type if you're at home is perfect. I heard somebody say it. That's exactly right. So leg.wa.gov, and then you will click on bill information. And then do you remember what the budget bill number is?
5036.
That's our other bill. That was the old one.
6032.
Good job.
Perfect, 6032.
I remember.
And this is the bill. So this is the budget bill. At the top it says making supplemental operating appropriations. It's a lot of big words, but basically that means budget. So that just means that this bill talks about all of the different ways that the state government is going to spend its money over the next year. And really, when it says supplemental, that means that it's making changes to an even bigger bill that passed last year. So every 2 years, there's a really big bill. And then the year after, there's a small bill that makes a little bit of changes based off of things that have happened or other priorities that have come up, like worker recovery. So that's how you can see a bill. And if you want to see if it's got signed or not, you can look to that page as well.
So I was wondering, why do all these legislators and all the other people in Olympia use all big complicated words? Why can't they keep things simple? Why can't they just say budget? Why do they have to say something supplemental and a bunch of other random words?
That's a great question. So part of the reason they use more complicated, larger words is because it more accurately explains what you're talking about. So it described it as making supplemental operating appropriations. And the reason those words are all significant is because if you were to just say budget, you wouldn't know which budget they're talking about. They could mean the biennial budget, which is what Chelsea just mentioned, the much bigger budget that's passed every 2 years. Or they could mean the transportation budget, because Washington State has 3 different types of budgets. They have the operating budget, which we just looked at. They have the transportation budget, and they have the capital budget. And then lastly, the word appropriations, I don't know why they use it, but basically that's basically the word budget. So you could say that the document we just looked at was making supplemental operating budget changes. Did that answer your question?
A bit. I'm wondering, so why can't they just say Washington State budget for whatever it is? Why do they have to say it?
That's a good question. So have you ever gone to the doctor's office and they'll tell you that you're sick with something and it's a really long, complicated word?
Yeah.
So I think in every type of field that you have, there's a certain way of talking. There's a way of speaking and words that they use that are very unique to the situation. And it's no different here in Olympia. We have a lot of really funky words like When you first have a bill and it's drafted and it's in hard form like this, and you want to get it into the whole system here in Olympia, you put it in a box, and that box is called a hopper. That's weird, right? A hopper. And it's so there's just kind of strange ways that things are done here in Olympia, but it's really no different than the strange ways that things are done in other fields. I think legislators want to feel important, and they want to feel like what they're doing is special, so they made some special words to talk about what they do.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Good job.
Hi, my name is Neelan, and I have a question about the website. When it says governor's desk, what does it mean by session law?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes. Do you want to do it again?
Sure, yeah. So the bill page says the governor, it's on the governor's desk, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's sitting on his desk. It just means that it has been delivered to the governor. And there's various steps in the process. So that's one of the steps, is that the legislature deliver the bill to the governor. The next step is for the governor to take action. So that's that indication right there where it says governor acted. Once the governor takes action, and like we talked about, he has 4 different options. Does anyone remember what those options are?
He can not do anything, and just let it pass in 20 days. He can sign it, veto it, or partial, and then he gets partial.
Yeah, you guys are
Really
listening.
good.
Yeah. So once the governor takes action, depending on what action that is, then the bill is no longer a bill. It becomes law. And as we talked about, that law is enacted based on the specific language in the bill. It's either immediately or 90 days after it's signed by the governor, or at a date mentioned within the bill itself. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead. We have about 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Does the bill go to the Supreme Court like after to make sure it's like constitutional and all that stuff?
That's a good question. So not necessarily. So there are, as you know, there's 3 different branches of government. So if a bill makes its way through the legislative process and becomes a law, it's good to go. The only way that it's going to get to the Supreme Court is that if somebody thinks that it's unconstitutional or that there's something wrong with the bill and they think that the court should take a look at it, what they'll do is they'll file a lawsuit, and then it will have to work its way through the judicial process, which is different. And it's a very complicated way of kind of making its way up to the Supreme Court, but really it starts at a trial court and then it goes to an appellate court, which is the second opportunity to see whether or not the bill would be constitutional. And then it would finally, on the 3rd step, get to this Washington State Supreme Court, which is actually just across the street. So if somebody decides that they think a law is unconstitutional, they can make that challenge and it can go before the Supreme Court, but it's actually a really long process. So if you thought the process here in Olympia to make a bill into a law was difficult, it is even more complicated across the street at the Supreme Court. But that does happen sometimes because there are legislators with very, very different beliefs and very different ideas about how to interpret the Constitution. And so sometimes some of them will think this bill is great and it's constitutional, and other times legislators will disagree. In fact, that came up this year when the legislators were talking about how to fund education, K through 12 education for you all. They were talking about property taxes and how we were going to fund education and which accounts the funding was going to come from. And there was a legislator that said this bill is unconstitutional. So if that legislator really cared, he could take it through the court process, and then maybe one day it would get to the Supreme Court.
I have one question for all of you in the room. Are you ready for it? This is the last question.
Sure.
Who is the most important person that's part of the entire government?
Us!
Us!
Good job. Yes, you're right. The people. So we just want to leave you guys with that, and remember that your engagement and your educating yourselves on the issues is very important.
And thank you for letting us spend time with you guys. We really enjoyed talking to you all and letting you know about the different ORCA bills and how they work their way through the process this year.
And what do we have to say to them?
Thank you.
Okay, well, we hope to see you next year.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
love that.
Yeah.
Longer session next year.
All
Okay.
right.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wait, so today's the last day.
Well, no,